all entirely innocent of any wrongdoing. The words of the coroner last Tuesday confirming what so many have known for 50 years. That the 10 people shot dead in Ballymurphy, West Belfast by the Parachute Regiment in 1971 were all innocent civilians, all victims of British state murder. All ordinary people living their lives, all people with hopes and dreams for the future, all taken away from their families, their friends, their communities in the cruelest of ways. This massacre occurred against the backdrop of the introduction of internment without trial, against the backdrop of sectarian pogroms waged against nationalists, as the British and Orange states violently lashed back against the just demand for civil rights. It was against this backdrop that the Parachute Regiment entered Ballymurphy, or the Murph as it's called, and murdered Francis Quinn, Father Hugh Mullen, Noel Phillips, Joan Connolly, Danny Taggart, Joseph Murphy, Edward Doherty, John Laverty, Joseph Corr, and John James McCurr. Joan Connolly was shot as she ran to the aid of Noel Connolly, and Father Mullen, the parish priest, was shot while waving a white cloth as he ran to help another victim. Some of those who were killed were shot in the back. Some were shot as they crawled or crouched for safety. Pat McCarthy, the 11th victim not covered by the inquest, died of a heart attack, not after an altercation, but in fact after a para put an empty gun in the man's mouth and pulled the trigger. So let's count Corda, these killings were not accidents. They were the outworking of premeditated British policy, and this was proven tragically by the fact that that very same regiment would shoot dead another 14 innocent civilians on the streets of Derry less than 1 year later. In the aftermath of the Ballymurphy Massacre, the soldiers congratulated each other in the full belief that their government would protect them, cover up for them. They patted each other on the back for a job well done. Such was the contempt that they felt for the lives that they had taken. And for decades, the black propaganda from the British authorities was that those shot in Ballymurphy were armed and that they posed a threat, a narrative propped up by the lack of any meaningful investigation into the killings. These people were not armed. They posed no threat. And all of this has been exposed for the shameful lies that they were, exposed as a cover-up of the horror, the absolute horror that the Parachute Regiment inflicted on the people of Ballymurphy. And now the dark clouds of lies have been parted. The truth has been set free. We wouldn't have gotten here last Count Corla if it wasn't for the families. Everything they went through was summed up in the words of Alice Harper, whose father, Danny Taggart, was shot 14 times during this massacre. She said, "We've waited a long time. 50 years is a long time to wait. We always knew they were innocent, but now it has been proven. And for what our family has been through, not just our family, but all the families, I am overwhelmed today. It's just a relief now that we can shout from the rooftops that our daddy was innocent." And her brother John said, "We've corrected history today. The inquest confirms that the soldiers who came into this area supposedly to protect us turned their guns on us." On Thursday, I was with the families in Ballymurphy, and it's a meeting that I will remember for the rest of my life. It was humbling to be with them, to hear how they felt following the verdict, and I have always been and remain in awe of their courage, their resilience, but above all else, perhaps, their stamina. I am in awe of their humanity. It's hard to fathom what it must have been like for these families to wake up every morning since 1971, feeling the immense loss and the immense injustice, to see the empty chair, to think about the beautiful lives ripped away from them, and then to face the torrent of lies about their loved ones, and still to be able to carry on. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, against overwhelming odds, and for 50 years, for half a century, found in themselves an inspirational reservoir of strength to keep going. Some have grown up looking for the truth. Some have grown old. Some have died heartbroken without it. But they refuse to allow the propaganda to stand. They refuse to allow their loved ones to be forgotten. And with an unwavering determination, they cut through those lies of the British state, and they gave it everything they had, and they have prevailed. The result of the inquest is bittersweet for the families. The botched apology offered to them by Boris Johnson has caused hurt and anger. The apology was silent on the massacre, didn't mention the paras. It was, as Mary Kate Quinn, the niece of John Laverty, described it, the apology of a government, she said, more concerned about laying the groundwork for amnesty legislation. And what Ms. Quinn was referring to is the confirmation of the British government that they will now attempt to block these families from getting justice. This they will do in open defiance of the Stormont House Agreement, an international agreement signed with the Irish government on dealing with the legacy of the past. So on the very same day that the Ballymurphy families saw their loved ones declared innocent, on the day the door to truth was finally opened, the door to justice was slammed in their faces. The Stormont House Agreement is about facilitating the pursuit of truth and justice in a balanced, transparent, inclusive and fair manner. And it is wholly unacceptable that the British government is set to walk away from these obligations and instead put in place rogue legislation that is unashamedly designed to avoid accountability. It seems that those paras who patted each other on the back in 1971 were right after all. Their government, their system will do absolutely everything they can to protect them. This is wholly about stopping the Ballymurphy families and so many other families from across the board from having the justice that they deserve for their loved ones. When I spoke to the Ballymurphy families last week, they made it very clear that amnesties must be off the table, and they are absolutely right. Those involved in British state murder of innocent civilians must be held to account, and Boris Johnson and the British government must face up to that. Because now Britain can no longer continue to hide its dirty war in Ireland. Proceeding with an amnesty at the expense of pursuing accountability will have a profound and fundamental implication for confidence in the rule of law and the administration of justice. Making agreements is important in our peace process, but keeping agreements is even more important. And the British government cannot be allowed to tear up Stormont House and wash their hands of the family's right to justice. It's wrong, it's disrespectful, it's deeply hurtful, and it's not on. In February last Count Corla, members of the Dáil stood as one in calling for the British government to honour their commitments to introduce legislation implementing Stormont House and to protect the right to justice and truth. The cynical behaviour on the part of Mr Johnson and his government must be forcefully challenged by our government in Dublin. Dublin must now stand foursquare behind the Ballymurphy families and all of those waiting decades for the truth about what happened to their loved ones. And the message must go clearly from this chamber that this will not stand, because the Ballymurphy families are very clear. Their journey is not over, far from it. They're intent on justice. They're taking this stand not just for their own families or their own community of the Murph. They take this stand for everyone. After 50 years fighting for the truth to be set free, after 50 years seeking vindication for their loved ones, after 50 years of an inspirational struggle, it is the very least they deserve. The Ballymurphy families never gave up. The Ballymurphy families never gave in, and now they must have justice, and it is the job of the Irish government to ensure that Boris Johnson and his Tory government cannot deny them that.